The legal definition of lynching is when 3 or more persons, which constitute a mob, put someone to death extra-legally without court sanction, without legal sanction, and they do it for the purpose of tradition and or whatever their version of justice is. And this becomes a legal definition by the 1920s of the NAACP and their struggle, of course, against lynching and trying to make lynching a federal crime. Lynching actually begins in the Revolutionary War years. And it's named after the brother of the man who founded Lynchburg, Virginia. And lynching took place, this is extra-legal justice, in quotes, takes place during that period of time because it's not too many courts. It's sort of difficult to get to them. This is a period, the British are also in place in many places in the South, and so it becomes very dangerous to move around. And so this is a form of justice, of local justice that is not condoned by a formal court. It's interesting, it's not until 1886 that the number of black lynch victims actually exceed the number of white lynch victims. So this is an American tradition that becomes racialized later for a number of reasons.
In an effort to maintain white supremacy in the South in the aftermath of slavery, lynchings, this process of lynching wherein individuals who were accused of crimes but who were not tried in a court of law would simply be taken out and lynched. And although people don't often talk about it, this process of lynching often involved these other elements that I'll discuss very briefly, which is to say these typically involved African American males. And in addition to being lynched, they were often castrated, and they were often burned, sometimes burned alive. This occurred well into the 20th century. So again, it's a disturbing and uncomfortable subject to raise, but it was a fairly regular feature of Southern life in the early part of the 20th century.
James Allen has collected a photographic record of racial violence in the South. For the past 20 years, he's found horrifying pictures in the family albums of ordinary Southern homes. Many are postcards that were mass-produced as souvenirs.
Some of these images were printed in the tens of thousands and sold for a dime or $1 a piece. Some of the postcards tell you where to write and the discounts you'll get if you buy 1, 10, or 100. They were sold in drugstores and pharmacies. They were sold on the street. I purchased a photograph from a woman. The photographer sold them door to door. Her mother bought the image for $2. A murder that is of particular interest to me was of a 17-year-old boy by the name of Jess Washington in Waco, Texas, in 1916. He was seriously mentally challenged. The wife of the farmer that he worked for was found dead. He was arrested. He was brought to trial. The trial took from 10 until 12. And when the jury came back at noon and found him guilty, someone in the courtroom, and it would have been anyone in the courtroom, screamed out, "Get that nigger." And one of the worst and cruelest treatments of a human being began. Jess was kicked down out of the courthouse, down the back steps where a crowd of several hundred was waiting for him. They put a chain on his neck. There were 16,000 people crowding the street to watch this boy be tortured. Jess was tied to the chain over a branch of a tree. The fire was started. They raised Jess from the fire up into the air so that the crowd could see him. There were cheers, like at a football game, cheering the torturers on. When Jess tried to climb up the chains, hand by hand, they cut his fingers off one by one so that all he could do was slap at the chain. They lowered him back down in the fire. A man came up and castrated him. Another man kept a pole so that he couldn't crawl out of the fire. And time and again, they pulled him up to keep him from dying so that the crowd could be satisfied, until he finally died.
In Charlottesville. On the one side, 26-year-old Matt Heimbach, one of the leaders of a white nationalist group preparing for today's Unite the Right demonstration, thought to be the largest gathering of white supremacists in the U.S. in decades, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center.
I would fight a certain song for him if he invited me to a public hanging at me on the front row. Me to a public hanging at me on the front row.
Senator Harris and I are requesting that after a century, after 100 years, and over 200 different bills introduced in this body, that we finally make lynching a federal crime in the United States of America. And thanks to the work of incredible people around this country, truth tellers,
Wells became a leader in anti-lynching and essentially almost invented it, I would say. because of a sort of terrible personal experience she had. It was a terrible lynching in Memphis in which 3 black men were killed.